Well, as Bethany mentioned in her children's moment, we've been spending the summer looking at some different superheroes from the Bible and from comic books. And we've looked at different characteristics that they have. The Bible's full of people that have lives just like you and me, and we've explored the lessons of a lot of people from the Old Testament and even one from the New Testament. But we've talked about Esther and Rahab and Moses and Aaron and Nehemiah and Caleb and David and Simon Peter. The Bible is full of superheroes, and as you heard, today we're going to be thinking about Ruth and what characteristics she brings that we might want to learn more about for ourselves. The challenges that each of them have faced and how they overcame them were not really all that different than the challenges we face today, and that's why their stories impart such wisdom to us. Their humanness really resonates with us, doesn't it? And that's why they're these great teaching tools. We can see that God has intervened in their lives, and we can trust that God will intervene in our lives as well and help us through the challenges that we face. So today we're going to explore that superhero trait of selflessness, as Bethany mentioned. Now we've got to think about what superheroes might have those characteristics. So the best way to discover that, I figured, was to Google it, because I'm not real familiar with all the superheroes. The first one that came up was one that I expected. It was Spider-Man, because Spider-Man is a very selfless kind of guy. But there was another team that came up called the Fantastic Four. Now, if you're a movie buff and a comic book buff, you may have even gone to see the movie that just came out about the Fantastic Four. I understand it was a real bomb, so if you didn't get to see it in the movies and you really, really want to see it, I suspect it'll be on television real soon. But there was one line from the movie trailer that I also could find online. One line that really hit me. It was the last line in this trailer. And one character said to the other, "Well, he's stronger than any of us." And the other character said, "But he's not stronger than all of us." And that's something that we all need to think about. Now, in these, the two on the right are brother and sister. So they kind of form the heart of the Fantastic Four. And so there's family connections that have created them, but then they've also been able to bring on other members of the team, which is how they become the Fantastic Four. They're kind of stereotypical superheroes. They're a creation of fiction and endless possibility, but somewhere in there, there's a nugget of truth for all of us. And that's this characteristic of selflessness, which is really very much at the heart of Christianity as well. He's not stronger than all of us together. I love, love, love that they are a team, that it's not just the superhero alone, but it's a superhero team. We talked about the Justice League last week, I think. And so, when you have a whole group of people, that's really where I think we really all come together. So the movie may not sound too great, but I don't know. There's at least that little nugget that I liked. So fast forward from that movie that wasn't so good to an incident that we all probably saw on the news this week. There was another team that kind of showed superhero traits. That team of 4 or 5 men on the train in France. Did you see it? Did you hear about it? Together they formed that same kind of team like the Fantastic Four, not thinking about themselves as much as how they were going to save those people on the train, how they were going to stop that gunman from taking anyone out. So if you think about it, they just kind of were totally selfless. They just flew into action without giving it a whole lot of thought. They did what seemed almost to be part of just how they're hardwired, you know? That gunman may have seemed stronger than anyone else on the train because of all the weapons that he had, but he was not stronger than that team of men who decided to act together to take him down. And this is also a trait that's epitomized by Ruth. She is the biblical character that, for many of us, seems totally selfless in everything that she does. She was dedicated, she was loyal, she was loving, she was completely selfless. So we read a little bit about the beginning of her life, and her story may be familiar to most of you, but let me just refresh your memory a little bit. It was during a time of famine in Bethlehem that Naomi and her husband and her 2 sons went to Moab, which was the land that Ruth lived in and Orpah lived in. And while they were there, the 2 sons grew and they got married to Ruth and to Orpah. And the 2 women were brought into their household even though they were not Jews. But they learned how to become Jews. They learned about the God of Naomi. They learned about the God of Moses and Abraham. Now, subsequently, Naomi's husband and her sons all died, leaving 3 widows to fend for themselves. It was the tradition that Naomi would go back to her homeland and that the male relatives there would watch out for her as a widow and take care of her. But it was Naomi's wish that her daughter-in-laws go back to their families so that their families could take care of them. And she also said, you know, you ladies are young enough, you can marry again, but I'm not going to have any more sons that you can marry, so you might as well go home, be with your family. So Orpah kissed Naomi goodbye, and off she goes back to her family. But Ruth uttered these familiar words, "Wherever you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people. Your God shall be my God, and where you die, there I will die and be buried." Those words have been used in marriage ceremonies because they really do echo the marriage vows that many of us have taken. And if you think about it, that's really the kind of covenant that Ruth was forming with Naomi. It was that kind of a loving relationship. We're going to be in this together. It was a turning point for both of their lives. Ruth dedicated her life to Naomi, which almost seems illogical to us, and yet that was what she did. So back in Bethlehem, Ruth and Naomi are able to survive with the help of the male family members, Naomi's male family members. And they not only survived, but they learned how to thrive, and they were able to really form new lives for themselves. Ruth eventually married and gave birth to a son. Now, the importance of her son is that she, by having this son, became part of the lineage of Jesse and David, and many generations down the road, Jesus of Nazareth. Ruth chose love for another above all else, and that choice created not only a wonderful life for her, but it created the heart of what was to beat many generations in the future, that same heartbeat of selflessness that would beat in Jesus. A heart of selfless, unconditional, non-judgmental, all-forgiving love. That's what beat in Jesus, and that was what kind of seems to be carried down through the lineage. So it reminded me that to ask that question, you know, that age-old question, are people born selfish or unselfish, or are they created by the people around them and by their situations? Even in the world of fiction, the question emerges. A few weeks ago, Pastor Joe talked about why did Batman become Batman? Why did Spider-Man become Spider-Man? Why did the Incredible Hulk become the Incredible Hulk? Those are their origin stories. And in the comic books, the origin story usually doesn't happen until several episodes into the comic book series. Because until we hear what wonderful things these superheroes can do, we really don't care where they came from. We don't care about how they became that person until we learn what they've done. So what made them that way? And if you look at the Bible, the same thing is true about the story of Jesus. The first gospel that we know to be written was the Gospel of Mark. Does the Gospel of Mark have a birth story in it? No. Matthew and Luke have the birth stories in them, and they came later. It wasn't until everybody found out what a wonderful guy this Jesus of Nazareth was, until we understood more about Jesus the Christ, that people said, where did this guy come from? How did he get that way? And that's when we hear what the birth story is for Jesus, just like we do with the comic book heroes. Now think about those heroes on the train in France. They were just tourists, businessmen, military guys on leave. Nobody really knew their backstories until they did something heroic. And then we start to learn a little bit more about them. I've read that one of those superheroes has asked to remain anonymous. And for me, that mark of humility, that's what really makes this guy a superhero that was selfless. He may have his own reasons for doing that, but that mark of humility combined with the selfless acts, that's the mark of a true hero. So, what do you think? Raise your hand. Do you think people are born selfish? Or people are born unselfish? Not so sure. Seem to have some mixed answers there. Well, there have been many, many studies. And even the researchers and all the professionals, they're not totally convinced one way or the other. But as far as I'm concerned, God created us with free will. And if we've got free will, then we have the opportunity to choose. Which for me means we can think about, are we going to go with what's best for me or what's best for someone else? We have that choice. Are we going to do what's best for those that I love? And if we've got free will, we also get to decide who are the ones that we love. Who are we going to include that in? We might find ourselves being selfless towards some people, but not towards others. It's all about choice. Well, we know that the people around us can influence our way of thinking and our way of behaving, our way of responding, or our way of acting. But did you know that the way we act and respond can also be influenced by video games? Now, not all of you play video games, but many of you do. So if you think about the types of video games you play, that also influences whether you're going to be a selfish person or a selfless person. Who knew that that virtual world was going to influence us? But what we've discovered is doing a behavior is really important. And so when you're playing a video game, you are doing that behavior. Even if it's in a virtual world, you're still doing that behavior. So learning about something, reading about something, those are important. Seeing it modeled by other people, that's all important too. But it's really when you get down to actually doing it that it makes a difference. And that's when it becomes part of you. Think about those, the guys that were on the train, the military guys that were on vacation. They have gone through training and training and training so that what they did really had become part of them. They just flew into action because it was the right thing to do without even thinking, because they'd been trained to do so. The rest of us might take a little longer because we haven't necessarily been trained to do that. It kind of goes against all logic to jump into somebody's arms and try to take them down if they've got guns and knives and things. But we've all realized, and they've realized through the years, that the violence that we observe on TV and in the movies affects us. And we know that the video games do affect some of the violence that we're seeing in society. But I'm here to tell you that there is a glimmer of hope out there for video games. Because I read this interesting study from Stanford University, and in the text that'll be posted online, there's the link there if you want to see the study. But I'll tell you what it was about. So there were 60 people, 30 men and 30 women. And they were going to be in this virtual world with goggles on. And they went in one at a time. And their mission was to save a diabetic child who was in need of a shot of insulin. They all had that same role. Their mission was the same. But half of them were going in as Superman. And so they directed themselves in this video game like by putting their arms up in the air, and they'd fly through the streets like that. And the other half were passengers in a helicopter. And at the end of 2 minutes, every person that went into that saved the child. So the experiment was not really about saving the child, although that's what they thought it was about. The real experiment started after the video game and after they came out and took their goggles off. So they sat down at a desk with the interviewer. And as the interviewer is interviewing them, she knocks over a cup on her desk that has 15 pens in it. So she knocks it off accidentally. And how long do you think it took before someone picked them up? Well, the people that went through this virtual world as Supermen picked up pens, started picking up pens in 3 seconds. The people who were the passengers in the helicopter, it took them 6 seconds to pick up the pens. And that was 1 second longer than the interviewer herself. She waited 5 seconds to pick them up just to see what would happen. That was all part of the test. And some of the passengers in the helicopter, 6 of them in fact, didn't pick up any pens at all. They just ignored the situation. So what the researchers have come to understand is that this study shows that heroic behavior, even in a virtual world, can transfer to empathy and to altruistic behavior. And if you actually do it like Superman, as opposed to being the passenger and just observing it happen, makes a huge difference. So it's all about doing the behavior. That's what's really most important. Not only that, but there's another clinical psychologist who's been observing comic books, and this person says that actually real people understand by reading comic books that they too can take on some of these characteristics. So that's when reading about it is a good thing. So reading about it is a good thing, but doing it is even better. And any of you who are teachers, any of you who've been on mission trips, I mean, we know that by doing something, we learn it much more rapidly. In fact, we talked about it in the 9 o'clock service. Somebody said that, I think it was Chris Carl, said, well, he went through 4 years of college, learned how to be a teacher, but it's when you actually become the teacher and you actually have to get up there and do it and do the lesson plans and everything, that's when you really know it. If you're learning to swim, you can watch somebody swim, but it's by getting in the water and doing it that you're going to really learn to swim. So I think we can probably agree on 3 things about selflessness. First of all, it's influenced by others. It's greatly influenced by others. We can see others doing it. We can experience the benefits. We can understand why it makes a difference to us and how we can care for others. And as we mature, we learn from people around us, and we become the teachers as well. So any of you who think you're not teachers, anything that you are doing, someone is observing it, and you're teaching them about this characteristic, about being selfless or being selfish. And second, I think that we can agree that unselfish behavior is learned by doing it, and doing it repeatedly until you do it without even thinking. Just like those fellows on the train, it's got to become an immediate reaction. And that's what happens as we mature, hopefully, is that we do become more selfless. And third, selflessness is about loving others more than we love ourselves. And isn't that what the heart of Christianity is all about? Isn't that really the great message that Jesus taught us? It's all about the others. It's not about ourselves. Many of us would not react the way those guys did on the train. And I would be the first one to say, I'm running in the other direction if I can. But there are ways that we can become more selfless in our everyday actions. We could make lifestyle choices that protect the environment. We can intentionally support businesses that treat their employees justly, and even if it costs a little bit more. Think of Tom's Shoes and what a great marketing gimmick Tom's Shoes is. Well, the guy that started Tom's Shoes didn't start it because he wanted a marketing gimmick. But if you're not familiar, those are shoes that you buy a pair and then they donate a pair to someone in need. Well, now there are lots of companies that have gotten on the bandwagon with this marketing gimmick. And it's happening all over. I can't remember which one of the pharmacy companies, I don't know if it was Walgreens or CVS or one of them, I saw the other day. If you buy this, they'll give one to somebody in need. It's not just a marketing gimmick, it's a wonderful way of teaching people to care for others and to be selfless. Many of us can relate to those actions of Ruth as well. We've cared for other family members as they've aged or as they've gone through life's transitions. When we live together and we love together as a family, we just care for one another. And that's part of who we are as families. And that's been going on for generation after generation after generation. So in this coming week, I challenge you to think about the choices that you are making. What are they teaching and what are they saying about you? Selflessness is a learned behavior, folks, but we're never too old to learn it. Amen.